Hello, my sweet summer children. I'm back with some juice to get you through the long night. And the night is long. So I brought with me today my friend, Joe Magician.
Hello, everybody. Joe here, excited to talk about some Night King shenanigans.
Yes. So we're going to be talking about the Night King and what he wants. I think we both have similar theories. I think yours is probably better than mine.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to say who's better, but I will say it's mine.
Okay. I think we should talk about it. And basically, in order to talk about it, we need to talk about the prologue.
Oof. The prologue. One of the best chapters in A Song of Ice and Fire.
Arguably the most important chapter in A Song of Ice and Fire.
Close to it. It's very, very, very important.
Prologue basically says what the Night King wants. And when I say the Night King, so I get a lot of shit about saying the Night King when I'm talking about book canon. And I just want to say that I don't care. Miss me with that. Because the Night King, in my opinion, is the great other. So in the books, they're not actually called White Walkers. They're called others. And there's like this head honcho, and he's the great other. Mm-hmm. So that's why I just think that he's called the Night King on the show. So
sure, it makes sense. It's a lot of people like to hang up on that. There's a quote where George basically said the Night's King, like most mythological people, he's unlikely to have survived to the current day. Like, okay, fine, but there's probably someone in charge of the others, and that's basically who the Night King from the show is, even if it's not explicitly the same person.
Yeah. So the prologue of Game of Thrones, the first words on the pages are, "We should start back." I think that if you want to talk about how the prologue sets up the book, you have two seasoned, I guess you would say, small folk, basically telling this High Lord, we're going the wrong way. We need to turn around and go back. And he's not listening. Like, he's not taking that for an answer. And that's basically, when you look at the story through like big lenses of the whole story, that's basically the whole entire story is everyone going the wrong way and doing things that don't matter. Like, the High Lords are playing their games and the small folk are suffering. Robb is going south when he should be going north. Everyone's at war when they shouldn't be.
It's really emblematic. This happens to Ned Stark. He gets told by Garrett or Will, depending on the show or the book, which one you're talking about, that the White Walkers and the others have returned. And he listens to them, says basically it's full of nonsense, cuts the guy's head off, and goes on with his life. And I believe it's at some point Osha says exactly what you're talking about, that Robb's going the wrong way. Ned's basically going the wrong way. Going south is not where the Starks should go. And there's actually a fun line where somebody says, like, I think it's Littlefinger, he says, when the Starks come south of the neck, they melt. It's like, yeah, stay in the frozen north, you Nimrods. This is not what you should be doing.
So we're going to be talking about the book prologue. We're going to be talking about the show and how it translates into the show, and basically what we think the White Walkers are after. Right now, Will, Garrett, and Waymar are tracking wildlings. Mm-hmm. They've been gone about a week from the wall.
Yeah, I think it's like 8 or 9 days at the point where they die.
Yeah, so they've been gone for about a week, and they're tracking wildlings. And all day, Will feels like something has been watching them and stalking them. Mm-hmm. And he wants to go back, but Waymar's like, no, we're not going back. You won't make me a failure on my first ranging. So this is his first ranging, but Will and Garrett are seasoned rangers. The biggest part about the prologue, to me, the difference between the book and the show, is that the White Walker doesn't kill anyone other than Waymar Royce in the book. In the show, he killed the White Walkers kill Garrett and Waymar. Mm-hmm. But in the books, they just kill Waymar and they leave. And a reanimated Waymar kills Will.
Yeah, but they reanimated him, so they did kill him too. But like not with like their sword, I guess.
But did they reanimate him?
Yes.
We know that.
Yeah, his eyes were glowing blue.
I know, but did they were they warged into him and knew he was going to kill him, or they just
they raised
rolled
his
the dice?
corpse back up and just had him kill Will.
I disagree.
What?
I disagree. I think Will did it on his own. I mean, I think Waymar did it on his own.
You think he was still alive?
No, I don't think he was alive.
What do you say?
Like, okay, so when the dead Rangers come back to the wall, there's a quote that basically says, like, they knew to go to the Lord Commander's room or either John's room.
Mm-hmm.
They knew. The quote is, a part of them still remained. So it was Will's responsibility to holler out and tell Waymar, something's coming. Do you see that? He didn't say anything. He kept quiet and only cared about himself. So when Waymar was reanimated, he remembered and he killed him. The North remembers.
I've never heard that before. Okay, I guess. It doesn't seem... It's not like consequential whether or not he did it on purpose or if the others puppeted him and made him do it, I guess. It ends up in the same place.
I mean, to me, it doesn't end up in the same place, because why butcher Waymar and then just casually leave Will in the tree, let Garrett escape? Why? They clearly were targeting one person.
Well, yeah, they were there for Waymar.
So they were targeting Waymar because Waymar looked like a Stark.
Well, he looked like Jon Snow in particular.
I just think a Stark.
Ugh, unbelievable, treacherous. How could you go against the video?
I'm not going against the video. Like, I agree that Jon Snow looks like a Stark. What do you mean?
Yeah. So the basic idea is that, when Waymar, Will, and Garrett, they made a stop during their journey. They stopped at Craster's Keep, and Craster in the book, and I believe I'm not sure if he does it in the show. He definitely does it in the book. He looks at John and says, "Hey, you kind of look like a Stark." Much later, and if you go backwards, where you learn that Craster has a deal with the others, basically where he gives up his sons as some sort of protection or sacrifice or worship of some kind. You can work backwards and be like, oh, so if he recognized John as being a Stark, maybe he recognized Waymar too. And then you look into the descriptions a lot more and you find that George uses the exact same descriptive language for Waymar and John, only a chapter apart. He calls them gray-eyed, graceful, and slender. That's how Waymar is described. And then you get the description of John. John's eyes were gray so dark they seemed almost black, but there was little they did not see. He was an age with Rob, but they did not look alike. John was slender where Rob was muscular, dark where Rob was fair, graceful and quick where his brother was strong and fast. So get those right next to each other. The dark part is the dark hair, and the Royces have brown and black hair themselves. And in addition, there's the calendar art that got approved by George, the one I used in my video, by Magali Villanueva, which shows Waymar with the black hair that makes him look exactly like a Stark. So you just kind of link these all together, and it's like, oh, they thought they had caught a Stark and they went to go kill him. And
he's also has First Man blood, and I think Waymar wears moleskin gloves. LML was telling me something about moleskin gloves.
I do love the moleskin gloves. Well, he's highborn. That's an important part too.
Yeah, and he has like this freshly forged, glittered, jewelry sword that they may check out to like, hey, is this Valyrian steel?
They did look at it. Yeah, they stopped in he holds it over his head, and all of their eyes snap to look at the sword for a second. And I don't think they were looking for like Valyrian steel. I think they were looking for Lightbringer. I think they were waiting for the sword to burst into flames.
Oh God.
Well, you can't tell Valyrian steel really just by looking at it. It doesn't look particularly different unless you're holding it because it's much lighter.
Well, no, it it has like black ripples on it, right?
You can
Like
put black ripples in a
Damascus,
regular sword.
but it looks like Damascus, right?
It does, but like the story of the last hero and Azor Ahai is that the others were defeated by a guy with a flaming sword. If they stop and like are scared looking at a sword for a second, it's probably because they thought it was Lightbringer, or they were worried it would be as he wielded it.
No, the story of the last hero is that he fought against the others with a blade of dragon steel.
Kind of. It's all in the past, Gray. It's so long ago. All the stories merge.
It's dragon steel they're looking for.
But no. They're looking for Lightbringer.
Okay, so they're looking for this sword. Okay. And Waymar Royce is out there, crowned in a sable cloak. He's highborn. He won't even sleep in Craster's hall. That Craster's house is beneath him. He's not even for it. He has like a war horse out there. Yeah. Doesn't he have a war horse?
Yeah, he's got a giant horse while the other guys have their small garrons, which are made for walking through the snow.
I think you described it as they were like testing to see if this was who it was.
Yeah, that's right. So the first thing they do, like we were just talking about, is Waymar unsheathes his sword and they look at it. But we know from what you're talking about early in the video that they were following Waymar, Will, and Garrett, because when they come upon the wildlings, they've been frozen to death, basically. But Waymar comments that they can't be frozen to death, that it's been too warm, that the wall has been weeping, because the weeping means that ice is falling off of it from it melting, basically. So, but they notice, Will specifically notices that there's a chill about it that kind of came out of nowhere, and that the wildlings were frozen, again, means with their supernatural control of the cold and ice, the others did it. So they've been kind of tracking the three of them up until this point. So the first part is they were visually inspecting Waymar by following them. Then they get the sword. Then they start the duel, and Waymar actually holds his own for quite a while in this, even though the others eventually overmatch him. So they're testing his abilities with his sword.
The other slid forward on silent feet. In its hand was a long sword like none that Will had ever seen. No human metal had gone into the forging of that blade. It was alive with moonlight, translucent, a shard of crystal so thin that it seemed almost to vanish when seen edge on. There was a faint blue shimmer to the thing, a ghost light that played around its edges, and somehow Will knew it was sharper than any razor. Sir Waymar met him bravely. Dance with me then. He lifted his sword high over his head, defiant. His hands trembled from the weight of it, or perhaps from the cold. Yet in that moment, Will thought, he was a boy no longer, but a man of the Night's Watch. The other halted. Will saw its eyes, blue, deeper and bluer than any human's eyes, a blue that burned like ice. They fixed on the long sword trembling on high, watched the moonlight running cold along the metal. For a heartbeat, he dared to hope. So the important part here is that Will, this person that has been mocking Sir Waymar, basically, all
internally,
day.
Garrett's the one that's been giving him crap most of the time.
Yeah. Internally, like, he's been thinking, like, so for Will, someone that actually has been with him these past 8 days on this ranging, that's been joking about him, to when he sees him stand against the White Walkers and raise his sword up and do the dance with me line, for Will to say, okay, now I respect him. Now he's a man of the Night's Watch. At the same time, the other sees exactly what Will is seeing. Like, okay, this is a real warrior. This is a real, possibly the prince who was promised, with a sword high above his head. Like, what's good? And they get scared. He freezes, he halts. And Will is even like, oh shit, like, is he gonna go away because of this? Like, he dared to think about that, but they didn't go away.
It shows that in that what they were expecting to find, or maybe what they were most afraid of finding, was probably some sort of prophesized hero or some kind, maybe a memory of the last long night. Something like that. Something about Waymar really reminded them and terrified the others in a way we don't ever see happen again. Like when we see them next, it's one of them is chasing down Sam and two other members of the Night's Watch. And it's almost like it's lazy what they do later. They don't even consider the men of the Night's Watch a challenge. It's 1 against 3. But in this moment with Waymar, it's 6-on-1 or 5-on-1. I think it's 6. And the other 5 are hiding. Like they're sitting there with their camouflaged armor out of sight. Almost like they're kind of scared to be seen by Waymar. Like maybe it's because they were trying to get Waymar into a situation where he would actually want to duel them, but could also be like, if things go bad, we got to be able to jump in and surprise him.
Yes. And things do go bad.
Yes, they do.
Things go horribly bad, and Waymar is killed. At that point, and he's not just killed, like
he's butchered.
He's butchered, and they're basically like laughing at him.
Yeah.
Or they're laughing at themselves for thinking he was this promised one. Or they think he still could have been this promised one and they've killed him. Ha ha ha. Like, fuck your prophecy. We've killed your prince who was promised.
Well, they mock him twice. The first time was when while they were dueling, the other lands a hit and it goes through his chainmail and he starts bleeding. And then the other kind of turns to the other ones, and you can kind of hear what he's saying by the tone where he's like, wait, what are we scared of? Like I was just talking about, the fear is starting to break. And then the moment where they actually do kill Waymar, the point at which the duel is ended, is when they finally shatter his sword. The piece of the sword goes into his eye. He falls to the ground screaming and bleeding everywhere. And they're like, okay, at this point it's over. But I think it's very important for understanding what happened that they waited until the sword broke and that Will was just bleeding that Waymar was bleeding everywhere before they were like, finally, we can just kill this guy. He's not who we're looking for.
Yeah. And they don't try to kill anyone else there. Like, they don't attack, sword fight anyone else there.
Nope.
Just him.
They never do it again.
And they leave.
Yeah.
No, they never do it again. And we don't see, like, this prologue is the last time we see the White Walkers do anything like this until with Storm of Swords.
But even then, like I was saying, they attack, but they normally attack using their whites, or they isolate people and just sort of kill them, like killing fish in a barrel. This is none of their behavior for the rest of the books makes any sense with this prologue. It's so out of the norm that you could almost wonder, like, are these like a different group of the others or something like that? Because none of it matches.
I think none of it matches for a good reason, though.
I do too.
So the next time we have an interaction with the White Walkers is the Fist of the First Men.
Yeah.
And the Fist of the First Men is attacked. And it's mainly attacked by whites.
Only whites. No others are cited during that battle.
No, it's after, right? When they're on their way back to Craster's.
Yeah, when they're hunting down the stragglers. That's when Sam takes out the dragon glass dagger that John found in the Night's Watch cloak and stabs it. Yes.
So was there a Stark there?
No, but they thought there should have been, because John left Crasher's Keep with the rest of the Night's Watchmen, but right before the attack, Corrin Halfhand unexpectedly asks to bring John and Ghost with him to try and find Mance's army. And they go to the Frost Fangs. That's where John ends up meeting Egret. But if you take into consideration that they probably know where the Night's Watch is going, again, because of Craster, they should expect to find John there. And they don't. And that's kind of probably why they were hunting down the stragglers. They probably went into the Fist and were looking at the bodies and realized he wasn't there. So they sent out others to go track down the stragglers, be like, maybe he escaped. Let's see if we can find him.
Exactly. And if you actually think about it, he was just there. He was just there. He goes with Corrin And if you think about like John is just a steward of the Lord Commander. Like, it's not reasonable to think that he wouldn't be there with the Lord Commander or with the rest of his brothers.
Mm-hmm.
Why would he leave them? Like, that's where they're all at. Why would he leave? So I think that again was probably them looking for John and they were too late, or looking for a Stark. I don't know if it's exactly John that they're looking for.
I do think it's in particular John, and this is something that I didn't write into the original theory. I posted the original theory on Reddit that leads into this conversation, at least on my side. It was called A Cold Death in the Snow, the Killing of a Ranger. And I got a comment later where somebody pointed out that there's one thing that Waymar does that John probably wouldn't, and that's that Waymar bleeds. John's going to be resurrected almost certainly as a firelight, which means in the future when he gets wounds, his blood is not going to come out hot and steaming like Waymar's does. And the others kind of pay attention to that too. So
you think they're going to notice that?
Well, like with Barrick, where it is noticeable that the blood that's coming out of him is basically blackened. And it's kind of like what Cold Hand says, where his blood congeals. When you look at when we look at the creation of the others and what we know about them, they come from the Children of the Forest. They were almost certainly made by them. The show has made that explicit, the books less so, but there's certainly a lot of hints you can get from that. And if the Children of the Forest can see into the future and have all these crazy visions like we see from Bran and Jojen and just this huge host of characters, then I don't see any reason why the others couldn't as well. They may see Jon, they may be looking for Jon Snow in the future, like post-resurrection.
It's interesting, but I've just always considered like that they don't know exactly what this person looks like. I've always thought it was Jon was like the last hero, the savior, but more recently I've been thinking it's Bran. So whether or not you're looking for a Stark or not, or you're just looking for Jon, like I was thinking like, well, if you're looking for a Stark, you could be looking for Bran too. Like, you don't know what he looks like, but if we're saying, well, they have access to the Weirwood net, they could be looking in the future, they could know exactly who they're looking for, then okay, that makes a little bit more sense.
Well, this is an important part that goes into that new part of the theory that I put into my video, is that nobody gets it right. Nobody gets the future right, except for basically Daenerys the Dreamer. She's basically the only one that made an accurate prediction that ended up being right. Even Melisandre gets it wrong. Everybody gets it wrong. So they could be looking for Jon and be wrong about it. They maybe should be looking for Bran, because he actually ends up filling the last hero role more directly in the story so far. And there's an important point about this prophecy business, is that most of it's like hugely symbolic and very hard to understand. Like we see that in Duncan Egg when Daeron the Drunkard, he dreams of Baelor Breakspear dying, but in his dream it's just a giant black dragon falling into Dunk's arms. You can't go from that to saying, oh, that's Baelor Breakspear. So they may have only seen in the future somebody that looks like Jon without knowing his name, without knowing when he's coming, or even like they may have only seen his face in like shadows. So it makes sense if they are going after Starks, or people that look like Starks, because that may be all they know.
Well, Bran's visions are a little bit different than Daeron the Drunkard. Like, Bran's visions are straightforward, like when he's using the Weirwood.
But of the past, not of the future. The future ones are very hard to understand.
Oh yeah, because his coma dream would be like kind of a future, future dream, and that is a little different.
Him going through the Weirwood, you're right, is like watching TV, but green dreams in particular, and that's what I mean, or dragon dreams from the Targaryens, the future ones are just impossible to understand. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Even like the Ghost of Highheart stuff is all symbolic. Definitely. Or Dany in the House of the Undying. I mean, that's a major part of her story in the books, is her internally remembering those visions and trying to fit everything into them. Nobody gets it. It makes perfect sense. The others wouldn't either.
And the fact that Danny's the dreamer allegedly got it right.
Yeah.
Suspect.
It is suspect. Why is she the one? But beyond what we're talking about here.
Yes, that is beyond it. Moving from the books, because that's the last interaction we have with the others, is the Storm Swords, the attack on the Fist of the First Men. In the show, we have Hardhome. In the books, it was a lot different. John never went to Hardhome.
Nope.
He never goes. So they just get this creepy letter, and it's really creepy. It was one of my Halloween favorites. But in the show, it translates the book, in my opinion, perfectly. Because every time John shows up, the White Walkers show up. And when Bran is around, the White Walkers show up too. But when John goes to Hardhome, the White Walkers are there, and he actually duels one and kills it. And the Night King doesn't just attack him. He doesn't just attack him. He just is like, just gonna stare at you. Gonna walk down this pier and stare at you some more. But you would think, like, if this is so, is it like, okay, you would think if this is the person that can undo everything you're planning to do, if this is your, like, Huckleberry, then why on earth wouldn't you chase him down and kill him?
This is a point that I love from the show, that they put in the scene, the duel between the Other and John, because like you're saying, it is almost a beat for beat parallel of Waymar's duel in the prologue and in the original pilot of the show that they had to scrap for financial and time reasons. They ended up changing it to the one we get with the body parts being arranged, but they did originally do it. And the main difference between Waymar in the book's prologue and the fight at Hardhome is that John has Valyrian steel, and he wins. And he wins, whereas Waymar has a regular sword and loses. And it's so directly the same, especially with how Waymar and John are supposed to look exactly alike. And how the White Walker eyes snap up and look at the sword. He looks at it too when they bounce off each other. And even then, like you were saying, the others were watching from afar, exactly like they did in the Haunted Forest for Waymar. Yeah. So I think it translates really good, and I think we're supposed to think now. And I think that's like one of the reasons why they put Hardhome full-fledged in season 5 like they did, was because they needed to convey something that that hasn't really been conveyed, and that's that John is this big key, like not even the key, but like the Achilles heel possibly of the Night King and the White Walkers. And even like again in season 7 it happens again, and John has the sword in his hand and he cuts through a few whites and basically shows how good he is with that sword, because it was like a real quick fancy move, like psh, 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 and then he does the flex. Yeah, he just flexes, and the Night King is just looking at him like, okay, I'm not worried about you. I'm gonna go kill another dragon. And the guy hands him an ice spear. He doesn't throw it at John. He could kill John right then and there, and he doesn't. And it's wherever John is, the Night King is, or the White Walkers are. But it's the same thing with Bran. Wherever Bran is, the Whites are coming. The Night King is coming. And the Night King is not coming to stare at Bran. He's coming to kill him. Yeah. So is it, I'm going to kill Bran because I know I can? Or is it, I'm not going to kill John because I'm afraid of him? I think you're right on the money with drawing the distinction between Bran and John and how they're treating them. I think this is my pet theory about what they want with John, that they can't get from Bran for whatever reason.